The crystal glass slipped from her hand in slow motion. Everyone in the grand hall turned toward the sound, but one man didn't move at all. Royal Guard James Mitchell stood frozen, his face drained of color, eyes locked on something no one else had noticed. Within seconds, his radio crackled to life, and the entire palace would be thrown into chaos. What he saw in that innocent afternoon tea would expose a threat that had been hiding in plain sight for weeks. The autumn sun filtered through the tall windows of Kensington Palace, casting golden patterns across the polished marble floors. Kate Middleton, the Princess of Wales, walked gracefully through the East Gallery, her heels clicking softly against the stone. She had just finished a morning filled with back-to-back meetings about her early childhood development initiative, and her schedule showed no signs of slowing down. A charity luncheon was set to begin in less than 30 minutes, and she needed a moment to collect her thoughts. Sarah Chen, her longtime personal assistant, walked beside her, carrying a leather portfolio stuffed with documents. Sarah had been with the royal family for 7 years, and she knew Kate's routines better than anyone. She understood when the princess needed space and when she needed company. Today, Sarah sensed the weariness in Kate's movements. "Your Royal Highness, would you like me to have tea brought to the blue drawing room?" Sarah asked, her voice gentle and considerate. "You have 20 minutes before the guests arrive." Kate smiled, grateful for Sarah's thoughtfulness. "That would be lovely, thank you. Just something light. Perhaps chamomile." Sarah nodded and pulled out her phone to send a quick message to the kitchen staff. The two women continued down the corridor, passing portraits of generations of royals who had walked these same halls. The palace was quiet at this hour, but most of the staff busy preparing for the luncheon in the state dining room. They reached the blue drawing room, and Kate settled into one of the antique chairs near the fireplace. The room was one of her favorites, decorated in soft blues and creams, with artwork that always brought her peace. She kicked off her heels for a moment and rubbed her temples. The pressure of constant public appearances, combined with her duties as a mother of 3, sometimes felt overwhelming within minutes. A silver tray arrived, carried by Margaret, one of the palace's senior housekeeping staff. Margaret had worked at Kensington Palace for over 20 years and took immense pride in serving the royal family. On the tray sat a delicate porcelain teapot, a matching cup and saucer, and a small plate of shortbread biscuits. "Your tea." "Ma'am," Margaret said with a slight curtsy, placing the tray on the side table next to Kate. "Thank you, Margaret," Kate replied warmly. She had always made an effort to know the names of everyone who worked in the palace, and the staff appreciated her for it. Margaret poured the steaming tea into the cup, the familiar herbal scent of chamomile filling the air. Kate picked up the cup, feeling its warmth through the fine porcelain. She brought it to her lips, ready to take her first sip and steal a few moments of calm before the chaos of the luncheon. But she never got that sip. Standing at his post near the entrance to the blue drawing room was James Mitchell, a royal protection officer who had been assigned to Kensington Palace for 3 years. James was known among his colleagues for his sharp instincts and unwavering attention to detail. He took his job seriously, perhaps more seriously than most, because he understood the weight of responsibility that came with protecting the royal family. James had positioned himself at a respectful distance, as protocol required, but his trained eyes constantly scanned the room. He watched the movements of everyone who entered and exited, noting anything unusual. It was a habit that had been drilled into him during his years of service in the military before joining the Royal Protection Unit. As Margaret poured the tea, something caught James's attention. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but his instincts screamed at him that something was wrong. He noticed a slight discoloration in the liquid as it flowed from the teapot into the cup. The tea wasn't the clear pale gold of chamomile. Instead, there was a faint cloudiness to it, a barely visible murky quality that shouldn't have been there. His heart began to race. Every fiber of his training told him to act. But he couldn't simply rush forward and snatch the cup from the princess's hand without cause. He needed to be certain. His eyes darted to Margaret, who stood calmly beside the tray, seemingly unaware of anything amiss. Then he looked back at the tea. Kate lifted the cup toward her lips. Time seemed to slow down, for James. His mind raced through possibilities. Had someone tampered with the tea? Was it simply a trick of the light? Could it be nothing at all? But he couldn't take that risk. Not with the Princess of Wales, not on his watch. James's voice cut through the peaceful silence of the room, louder and more urgent than he had ever spoken in Kate's presence. Kate froze, the cup inches from her mouth. She looked up at James with surprise and confusion. Sarah, who had been reviewing documents in the corner, jumped at the sudden outburst. Margaret's eyes went wide with shock. James stepped forward, his hand instinctively moving toward his radio. "Ma'am, please don't drink that tea. Put the cup down immediately." The authority in his voice left no room for question. Kate, trusting the judgment of her protection officer, slowly lowered the cup back onto the saucer. Her hands were steady, but her heart had begun to pound.
"James, what's wrong?"
she asked, her voice calm, despite the obvious tension that had suddenly filled the room. James moved closer, his eyes never leaving the teacup. Now that he was nearer, he could see it more clearly. There were tiny particles suspended in the liquid, barely visible against the pale color of the tea. It definitely wasn't right. "I believe there may be something wrong with your tea, ma'am," James said carefully. He pulled his radio from his belt. "I need to call this in immediately," Margaret gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "But I prepared it myself. I followed the exact instructions. I don't understand." Sarah had already stood up and moved closer to Kate, her protective instincts kicking in. "What do you see, James?" "The tea appears to be contaminated," James said, pressing the button on his radio. "Security, this is Officer Mitchell in the blue drawing room. We have a code red situation. I repeat, code red. Possible contamination of food intended for the Princess of Wales. I need immediate backup, and the security chief notified." The radio crackled to life with urgent responses. Within seconds, footsteps could be heard running down the corridor. Code Red was the highest level of threat alert at the palace, reserved only for situations involving immediate danger to the royal family. Kate remained remarkably composed, although her mind was racing. She looked at the innocent-looking teacup sitting on the table, trying to process what was happening. Someone had tried to poison her? Here, in the safety of her own home? It seemed impossible, like something from a movie rather than real life. 4 more security officers burst into the room, led by Commander David Reynolds, the head of palace security. David was a former Special Forces officer with decades of experience in protection services. His face was grim as he assessed the situation. "Everyone stay exactly where you are," David commanded. His eyes swept the room, taking in every detail. "Mitchell, report." James pointed to the teacup. "Sir, I observed unusual discoloration and particulate matter in the tea as it was being poured. The princess was seconds away from drinking it when I intervened." David approached the table carefully, pulling a small flashlight from his pocket. He shone it through the liquid, and his expression darkened. "Good catch, Mitchell," he turned to Margaret, who was trembling. "Where did this tea come from?" "From the kitchen, sir," Margaret said, her voice shaking. "I prepared the tray myself, just as I always do. The tea was in the usual canister in the pantry. I didn't notice anything strange." "Who else had access to the kitchen in the last hour?" David asked. Margaret thought for a moment. "The usual staff. Chef Robert, his 2 assistants, Emily from housekeeping, and Tom from maintenance was there earlier fixing one of the ovens. But they're all people who work here regularly. I can't imagine any of them would—" "We'll investigate everyone," David interrupted. He spoke into his radio. "I need forensics up here immediately with a field testing kit. No one enters or leaves the kitchen until further notice. Lock it down," he turned to Kate, his expression softening slightly. "Your Royal Highness, I'm going to need to ask you to move to a secure location while we sort this out. We need to treat this as an active threat until we know exactly what we're dealing with." Kate nodded, rising from her chair. She slipped her shoes back on, her movements steady and controlled. Years of training in maintaining composure during public moments were serving her well now. "Of course. What about the luncheon?" "It will need to be postponed," David said firmly. "Your safety is the priority. We'll inform the guests that you've been taken ill." Sarah had already gathered Kate's belongings and stood ready to accompany her. Two security officers positioned themselves on either side of the princess as they prepared to escort her to a secure wing of the palace. But before they could leave, a young forensics technician named Rachel burst into the room, carrying a compact testing kit. She was one of the palace's newest security additions, specially trained in chemical analysis and threat detection. "Commander, I came as fast as I could," Rachel said, slightly out of breath. She approached the tea table and carefully removed a small dropper and several testing strips from her kit. Everyone watched in tense silence as Rachel extracted a sample of the tea. She carefully placed drops onto different strips, each designed to detect specific types of substances. The room was so quiet that the ticking of the antique clock on the mantel seemed deafening. 20 seconds passed. 30. Then one of the strips began to change color, shifting from white to a deep purple. Rachel's face went pale. "Commander, we have a positive result. The tea contains traces of a substance that shouldn't be there. I'll need to run more detailed tests to identify exactly what it is, but this is definitely contamination." The words hung in the air like a physical presence. Someone had actually tried to poison the Princess of Wales. This wasn't a drill or a false alarm. It was real. David's jaw tightened. "Right? We're now treating this as an attempted assassination. Your Royal Highness, we need to move you now. Mitchell Rogers, stay with her at all times. Sarah, you're coming with us." "Margaret, I'm sorry, but you'll need to be questioned." "Rachel, bag everything on that tray as evidence." As the security team began to mobilize, James stood rooted to the spot for a moment. The reality of what had almost happened washing over him. If he hadn't noticed that slight discoloration, if he had hesitated for even a few more seconds, Kate might have swallowed the poisoned tea. The consequences were too terrible to imagine. Kate paused at the doorway and looked back at James. Despite everything happening around her, she managed a small, grateful smile. "Thank you, James. You saved my life today." Unable to find words, he watched as the princess was escorted away, surrounded by security personnel, and then turned his attention back to the crime scene that the blue drawing room had become. The forensics team was already photographing everything, bagging evidence, and documenting every detail. Commander Reynolds was on his phone, speaking in urgent tones to someone at Scotland Yard. The palace was on lockdown, and every person who had been near the kitchen that morning would soon be under intense scrutiny. James's mind raced as he replayed the events in his head. The tea had come from the kitchen, prepared by Margaret, someone who had worked at the palace for 2 decades. Could she have been involved? It seemed unlikely, but he had learned in his training that anyone could be compromised under the right circumstances. He thought about the others Margaret had mentioned. Chef Robert and his assistants were familiar faces who had passed countless security checks. Emily from housekeeping had been there for years. But Tom from maintenance? James made a mental note to find out more about him. As the investigation began in earnest, word of the incident was already spreading through the palace. Staff members whispered in hallways, their faces etched with worry and disbelief. The royal family's home, their sanctuary, had been violated in the most sinister way possible. In a secure room 3 floors above, Kate sat with Sarah and her security detail, processing what had just happened. She thought about her children, George, Charlotte, and Louis, who were at school, blissfully unaware that their mother had just escaped a potentially fatal attack. She thought about William, who was currently on a royal visit in Scotland and would need to be informed immediately. Her hands were steady, but inside a storm of emotions churned. Fear, anger, confusion, and a strange sense of violation. Kensington Palace had always been her haven, a place where she could let down her guard and simply be Catherine, his wife and mother, rather than the Princess of Wales. Now that safety had been shattered, back in the blue drawing room, James finally moved from his position by the door. He approached Commander Reynolds, who had just finished his phone call. "Sir, I'd like to volunteer for the investigation team," James said. "I want to help find whoever did this." David studied the young officer for a moment. James Mitchell had just proven his worth in the most dramatic way possible, and his instincts had undoubtedly saved a life. "You'll be debriefed extensively about what you saw, but the investigation itself will be handled by specialists from Scotland Yard and MI5. They're already on their way. James nodded, understanding. Of course, sir. But there's something else. Margaret mentioned a maintenance worker named Tom. I've seen him around, but I don't know much about him. When did he start working here? David's eyes narrowed. Tom Henderson. He's been here about 6 weeks. Came with excellent references from another royal property. But you're right to flag him. Everyone gets investigated, especially anyone new. As they spoke, 2 men in dark suits entered the room, their credentials identifying them as agents from MI5, Britain's domestic security service. The attempted poisoning of a senior royal had just become a matter of national security. And the full weight of Britain's intelligence apparatus was about to descend on Kensington Palace. The lead agent, a serious-looking man in his 50s named Peter Thornton, introduced himself to Commander Reynolds and immediately began issuing orders. A full sweep of the palace would be conducted. Every supply delivery from the past month would be traced. Every staff member would be interviewed and, if necessary, polygraphed. Background checks would be run again on everyone, with access to the royal family's food and drink. James watched as the blue drawing room, which had been a peaceful sanctuary just 30 minutes ago, transformed into a crime scene buzzing with activity. Forensics photographers documented every angle. Evidence bags were labeled and sealed. The teapot, cup, saucer, and even the shortbread biscuits were carefully packaged for laboratory analysis. His radio crackled again. It was one of the officers stationed at the kitchen. Commander Reynolds, we've secured the kitchen as ordered. We've identified the canister that the tea came from. It's being brought to forensics now. Good, David responded. Make sure you've logged everyone who was in that kitchen today. I want names, times, and purposes for being there. As the afternoon wore on, more details began to emerge. The tea canister had been stored in a locked pantry, accessible only to senior kitchen staff. Margaret's story was being corroborated by others. She had indeed prepared the tray herself. Following routine procedures, she had performed hundreds of times before. If the tea had been poisoned, it must have happened before Margaret ever touched it. The focus shifted to the canister itself. When had it been opened? Who had access to the pantry keys? Had anyone been observed acting suspiciously around the kitchen supplies? The questions multiplied, each one opening new avenues of investigation. By evening, preliminary lab results were coming in. The substance found in the tea was identified as a rare alkaloid compound, one that would have caused severe symptoms within minutes of ingestion. The amount present was potentially lethal. Rachel, the forensics technician, explained that it was sophisticated enough that it suggested someone with chemical knowledge, not just a random opportunist. James sat in the security office, having given his statement to multiple investigators. His mind kept returning to that moment when he first saw the discolored tea. What if he had dismissed it as nothing? What if he had been looking in a different direction? The what-ifs haunted him. Commander Reynolds entered the office, carrying 2 cups of coffee. He handed one to James and sat down heavily in the chair across from him. Hell of a day, Mitchell. Yes, sir, James agreed, wrapping his hands around the warm cup. Do we have any leads yet? David hesitated, then decided the young officer deserved to know something. We're looking at several possibilities. Could be someone with a grudge, could be politically motivated, could even be foreign actors. MI5 is running down connections. But here's what I want you to remember. You did everything right today. Your vigilance saved the princess's life. That's not going to be forgotten. James nodded, feeling the weight of the day settling on his shoulders. Somewhere in or around Kensington Palace, someone had walked freely, carrying out a plan to poison a beloved member of the royal family. That person might still be close by, watching, waiting to see if their attempt had succeeded. The investigation was just beginning, and the palace would not rest until answers were found. The next morning arrived with grey skies hovering over London, matching the somber mood within Kensington Palace. News of the incident had been kept strictly confidential, with only essential personnel aware of what had really happened. The official story released to the press was that the Princess of Wales had experienced a minor illness and would be resting for a few days. Meanwhile, behind the palace walls, one of the most intensive security investigations in recent royal history was underway. James Mitchell had barely slept. He'd remained at the palace through the night, giving multiple detailed statements to various investigative teams. Every moment of what he'd witnessed had been analyzed, questioned, and documented. Now at 6 a.m, he sat in the security briefing room along with a dozen other personnel, all waiting for Commander Reynolds and the MI5 lead investigator to update them on the overnight developments. Prince William had returned from Scotland in the middle of the night. Arriving through a private entrance to avoid media attention, James had seen him striding through the corridors with a grim expression, flanked by his own protection officers. The prince had spent several hours in meetings with security chiefs and government officials before finally being allowed to see Kate, who had been kept in a secure wing under constant medical observation as a precaution. The door to the briefing room opened, and Commander Reynolds entered, followed by Peter Thornton from MI5 and a woman James didn't recognize. She was in her early 40s, with sharp features and intense dark eyes that seemed to miss nothing. Reynolds gestured for everyone to take their seats. "Good morning," Reynolds began, his voice grave. "I want to start by saying that what we discuss in this room goes no further. The security of the royal family and the integrity of this investigation depend on absolute discretion." He paused, making eye contact with each person present. "This is Detective Chief Inspector Amanda Foster from Scotland Yard's Counterterrorism Command. She'll be coordinating the criminal investigation alongside MI5. DCI Foster stepped forward. "Thank you, Commander. Let me get straight to the point. We've been working through the night, and we have some concerning findings. The poison used in yesterday's attempt was identified as a synthetic alkaloid derivative specifically, a compound that's not commonly available. It requires both chemical knowledge and access to specialized laboratory equipment to produce." She clicked a remote, and a screen behind her lit up with images of the tea canister and various evidence samples. The contamination was isolated to one specific tea canister in the palace pantry. Forensic analysis shows that the poison was mixed directly into the loose tea leaves, probably within the last 72 hours. The canister was opened 5 days ago and had been used to prepare tea on 3 previous occasions without incident. James felt a chill run down his spine. The poisoner had struck recently, which meant they might still be close by. "We've conducted extensive interviews with all kitchen and housekeeping staff," Foster continued. "Margaret Hensley, who prepared yesterday's tea service, has been fully cleared. Her story checks out completely, and she had no motive or opportunity to contaminate the tea herself. The same goes for Chef Robert and his assistants. However, we have identified several individuals who had access to the pantry during the relevant time window." The screen changed to show a list of names. James's eyes scanned them quickly. Most were familiar faces, people he'd seen around the palace for years. But one name jumped out at him. "Tom Henderson, the maintenance worker." "Tom Henderson," Foster said, as if reading James's mind. 42 years old, employed at Kensington Palace for 6 weeks. His job was to conduct repairs and routine maintenance throughout the building, which gave him relatively unrestricted access to many areas, including the kitchen facilities. He was documented entering the kitchen pantry area 2 days ago to fix a faulty electrical outlet. Peter Thornton from MI5 took over. "We conducted a background check on Henderson when he was hired, and everything appeared legitimate. However, a deeper investigation overnight revealed some concerning information. The references he provided were real, but they appear to have been enhanced. One of his supposed former employers remembers him, but describes his work as merely adequate, not the glowing recommendation he submitted. More importantly, we've discovered that Henderson spent 3 years working in a private pharmaceutical laboratory before entering maintenance work." The room erupted in murmurs. A maintenance worker with pharmaceutical training who had access to the palace pantry. The pieces were falling into place, but James sensed there was more to come. "We attempted to locate Henderson for questioning last night," Thornton continued, his expression darkening. "He never returned home. His apartment appears to have been hastily abandoned. Clothes are still in the closet, food in the refrigerator, but his computer, phone, and any personal documents are gone. His car was found abandoned near Heathrow Airport early this morning." "So he ran," one of the other security officers said. "That's as good as a confession." "Perhaps," DCI Foster said carefully, but we need to consider why he ran and whether he's working alone. The sophistication of this operation suggests planning and resources. We're investigating his financial records, phone logs, and known associates. We've also issued an alert to all UK ports and airports, though if he left via Heathrow last night, he may already be out of the country. Commander Reynolds stood up. This palace employs over 400 people across various roles. We're reviewing every single employee's background again, looking for any connection to Henderson or anything else suspicious. We're also examining all security footage from the past week. If anyone noticed anything unusual, no matter how insignificant it might seem, might need to hear about it immediately.
James raised his hand.
Sir, I've been thinking about the timing. Henderson worked here for 6 weeks. Why wait until now to act? And why target the princess specifically? Was this just opportunity? Or was she the intended victim from the start? It was a question that had been nagging at him all night. The palace was home to multiple members of the royal family. If someone wanted to cause harm, why Kate? Why this particular moment? DCI Foster nodded approvingly at the question. Good thinking, Officer Mitchell. That's exactly what we're trying to determine. We're examining the princess's schedule for the past 6 weeks, looking for any patterns. We're also investigating whether there have been any threats made against her recently, either public or private. There's something else, Thornton added. We found evidence that Henderson had been photographing various areas of the palace with his phone. Nothing overtly suspicious. He could claim he was documenting maintenance issues, but the frequency and locations are interesting. He took multiple photos of the kitchen area, the pantry, and the routes between different sections of the building. He was mapping the place. Sarah Chen, Kate's personal assistant, had been asked to join the briefing. She sat near the back of the room, her face drawn with worry and lack of sleep. I've been going through the princess's schedule, she spoke up. The afternoon tea in the blue drawing room isn't a regular occurrence. It was added to her calendar only that morning because she had a gap between meetings. Very few people knew she would be there at that specific time. The implications were clear. Either this was an opportunistic attack when Henderson realized Kate would be having tea, or someone had informed him of her schedule. The second possibility was more disturbing because it suggested an accomplice within the palace. Staff or security team. Reynolds caught on immediately. Sarah, I need a list of everyone who had access to the princess's schedule that morning. Everyone, of course, Sarah replied. Already pulling out her tablet to compile the information, the briefing continued for another hour, with various team members reporting their findings. Security footage was being analyzed frame by frame. Henderson's apartment was being thoroughly searched by forensics teams. His previous employers were being interviewed. Financial records were being traced to look for any unusual payments or deposits that might indicate he'd been paid to carry out the attack. As the meeting concluded and people began to disperse, James found himself walking alongside DCI Foster in the corridor. She had noticed his insightful question during the briefing. You're the officer who spotted the contamination, she said. It wasn't a question. That was impressive situational awareness. How long have you been in royal protection? 3 years at Kensington, ma'am, James replied. 5 years total in protection services, and before that, I served in the military. Your instincts saved a life yesterday, Foster said. We're going to need people like you as this investigation develops. Are you willing to be more actively involved? James didn't hesitate. Absolutely. Whatever you need. Foster studied him for a moment, then seemed to make a decision. Come with me. There's something I want to show you. She led him to a room that had been converted into a temporary command center for the investigation. Whiteboards covered the walls, filled with names, timelines, and photographs. Computer terminals were set up with analysts working on various aspects of the case. In the center of the largest whiteboard was a photograph of Tom Henderson. Henderson looked ordinary, almost forgettable. Brown hair, average height, a neutral expression, the kind of person who could blend into a crowd without attracting attention. But his eyes, James noticed, had a certain intensity to them. We've been building a timeline of Henderson's movements over the past 6 weeks, Foster explained, pointing to a detailed chart on the wall. He started work here on September 15th. For the first 2 weeks, he kept a low profile, did his job competently, nothing remarkable. But then, 3 weeks ago, his behavior subtly changed. She pointed to several notations on the timeline. He started arriving earlier and staying later. He volunteered for additional maintenance tasks that took him into more areas of the palace. He developed a habit of eating lunch in the staff cafeteria, where he could observe people and overhear conversations. And his phone data shows he made several calls to burner phones, androphones and traceable numbers that we're still trying to identify. James studied the timeline carefully. He was preparing. Getting into position, exactly, Foster confirmed. But for what purpose? That's what we need to figure out. Was this politically motivated? Personal revenge? Was he hired by someone? And most importantly, is the threat over, or is there more to come? One of the analysts called out from her computer station, "Ma'am, we've got something." Henderson's bank records show a deposit of £15,000 6 weeks ago, right before he started working here. The transfer came from an offshore account. Foster moved quickly to the analyst station, James following close behind. "Can we trace it?" "Working on it, but these accounts are designed to be difficult to track. It'll take time, possibly days. But the amount and timing are suspicious." £15,000 is significant money, more than you'd expect someone in Henderson's position to have. "Payment for a job," James said quietly. "Someone paid him to get into the palace and carry out the poisoning." Foster nodded grimly. "That's our working theory, which means Henderson is just the hired hand. Someone else is behind this, someone with money and motivation to harm the Princess of Wales." Over the next few hours, more pieces of the puzzle emerged. Henderson's phone records revealed he had been in contact with at least 3 different individuals using encrypted messaging apps. The messages themselves couldn't be retrieved, but the metadata showed the communications had intensified in the days leading up to the poisoning attempt. A search of Henderson's abandoned apartment yielded more evidence. Hidden in a false bottom of a drawer, investigators found a detailed floor plan of Kensington Palace, with certain areas marked in red ink, including the kitchen, the pantry, and interestingly, several routes that would allow someone to move through the building while avoiding security cameras. There was also a notebook containing what appeared to be observations about palace staff routines. Henderson had been carefully noting when certain people took breaks, which areas were monitored most heavily, and which security protocols seemed most lax. He had been conducting surveillance from the inside, preparing for something. But the most chilling discovery was a photograph found tucked into the notebook. It showed Kate walking through the palace gardens with her children. Someone had been watching her, studying her movements, and Henderson had documented it. The photograph was dated just 1 week before the poisoning attempt. When James saw that photograph, something hardened inside him. This wasn't just an abstract threat or a criminal investigation anymore. These were real people, a mother and her children, who had been targeted by someone with cruel intent. The thought of what might have happened if he hadn't noticed that discolored tea made him feel physically ill. Prince William had been briefed on all developments, and he personally visited the security command center that afternoon. James was present when the prince arrived, and he could see the barely controlled anger in William's expression. "I want to know who's behind this," William said, his voice tight. "Not just Henderson, but whoever hired him. Whoever thought they could come into our home and harm my wife." He looked around at the assembled investigators. "Whatever resources you need, you'll have them. This doesn't stop until we have answers." Commander Reynolds spoke up. "Your Royal Highness, we're doing everything possible. MI5 has their best people on this, and we're coordinating with international intelligence services in case Henderson fled the country." "What about my family's safety?" William asked. "If Henderson was paid by someone, what's to stop them from hiring someone else? Are my children safe? Is Catherine safe?" "We've implemented the highest level of security protocols," Reynolds assured him. "Additional protection officers have been assigned. All food and drink for your family is now being prepared by a rotating team with constant supervision. Everything is being tested before consumption. We're treating this as an ongoing threat until we can confirm otherwise." William nodded, but the tension didn't leave his face. He turned to James, who had been standing respectfully to the side. "You're the officer who spotted the poison?" "Yes, Your Royal Highness," James replied, standing at attention. "Thank you," William said simply, but the depth of emotion in those two words was unmistakable. "You saved my wife's life. I won't forget that." Before James could respond, an analyst called out urgently from across the room, "We've got a hit on Henderson. Facial recognition picked him up at Heathrow last night. He boarded a flight to Istanbul at 11:45 p.m. Everyone rushed to the analyst station. Security footage from Heathrow showed Henderson moving through the terminal, wearing a baseball cap and casual clothes. He looked calm, unhurried, like any other traveler. He had used his real passport, which suggested either confidence that he wouldn't be connected to the crime so quickly, or that he had planned to disappear once he reached Turkey. "Istanbul is a hub," Thornton from MI5 observed. "He could have connected 2 flights going anywhere Middle East, Asia, Africa, Eastern Europe. We need to contact Turkish authorities immediately and get their cooperation in tracking his movements." After landing, DCI Foster was already on her phone, coordinating with international liaison officers. The investigation had just expanded beyond UK borders, complicating everything. Different jurisdictions, different laws, different levels of cooperation. It would make tracking Henderson significantly more difficult. As the afternoon turned to evening, Kate herself requested a meeting with the investigators. She had been kept informed of developments, but had been advised to rest and stay in secure quarters. However, she insisted on being briefed directly and on thanking the security team personally. James was surprised to be included in the small group that met with the princess. She was in a private sitting room, looking composed but tired. Sarah Chen sat beside her and Prince William stood nearby. His protective instincts clearly on high alert, Kate addressed the group with quiet strength. "I want to thank all of you for your extraordinary work over these past 24 hours. I know you haven't slept, and you've been working tirelessly to find answers." Her eyes found James. "And Officer Mitchell, I understand I have you specifically to thank for my life. Your vigilance and quick thinking prevented something terrible from happening." James felt his face flush. "Your Royal Highness, I was just doing my job. You did far more than that," Kate replied gently. "You trusted your instincts even when you couldn't be certain. That takes courage." She looked around at the others. "I know this investigation is ongoing, and I understand that we may not have all the answers immediately. But I need to ask, do you believe my children are in danger? Should we be changing our routines, keeping them out of school?" DCI Foster answered carefully. "Your Royal Highness, based on what we know so far, the attack appears to have been specifically targeted at you, not your children. However, we're not taking any chances. Security around your entire family has been significantly increased. We're also investigating whether this was an isolated incident or part of a larger plan." "There's something else you should know," Thornton from MI5 added. "We're exploring several possible motives. This could be politically motivated, someone opposed to your charitable work or public positions. It could be connected to international actors who see harming the British royal family as a symbolic victory. Or it could be something more personal that we haven't uncovered yet." Kate absorbed this information, her expression thoughtful. "I've received threats before, as I'm sure you know. Most of them are handled quietly by security. Has anything recent stood out?" Sarah spoke up. "I've been working with the security team to review all communications from the past 6 months. There have been the usual number of concerning messages and social media posts, but nothing that seemed to rise to the level of a credible threat. Certainly nothing that mentioned poisoning specifically." "Then whoever is behind this kept their intentions very quiet," Kate observed. "That suggests sophistication and planning." The meeting continued for another 30 minutes, with Kate asking thoughtful questions about the investigation's progress and the measures being taken to protect her family and staff. Despite having been the target of an assassination attempt just a day earlier, she remained remarkably calm and focused. James found himself impressed by her strength and composure under circumstances that would have shattered most people. As the group was preparing to leave, Kate requested a private word with James. The others discreetly moved to the far side of the room, giving them a moment of relative privacy. "I wanted to ask you something," Kate said, her voice low enough that only James could hear. "In that moment, when you saw something wrong with the tea, what made you speak up? You couldn't have been completely certain. You must have had doubts. James thought about her question. I did have doubts, ma'am. But I realized that if I said nothing and something happened to you, I would never forgive myself. The risk of being wrong and looking foolish seemed insignificant compared to the possibility that you might be in danger. Nodded slowly. That's the same calculation I have to make constantly in my role, when to speak up, when to take action. Knowing that I might be wrong, but that silence could be worse. She smiled slightly. It seems we have that in common. Thank you, James, for your courage and for trusting your instincts. You gave me the chance to see my children grow up. It's a debt I can never repay. James felt emotion tighten his throat. Your Royal Highness, seeing you safe is all the thanks I need. As he left the sitting room and returned to the command center, James felt the weight of responsibility settling even more heavily on his shoulders. Somewhere out there, someone had wanted Kate dead. They had planned carefully, executed their plans skillfully, and come within seconds of success. Henderson might be in Istanbul, but the person who had paid him was still unknown, still free, and possibly still planning their next move. 3 days had passed since the poisoning attempt. The investigation had expanded into something unprecedented in modern royal security history. The command center at Kensington Palace operated around the clock. With investigators from MI5, Scotland Yard, and international intelligence agencies coordinating their efforts, James had barely left the palace, catching only a few hours of sleep here and there when exhaustion forced him to rest. The breakthrough came on the 4th morning from an unexpected source. A junior analyst named Marcus Webb had been painstakingly reviewing months of financial transactions. Connected to the offshore account that had paid Henderson, most of the data was fragmented and deliberately obscured, but Marcus had a talent for finding patterns in chaos. At 3 in the morning, he found something that made him immediately wake up. DCI Foster. Oh, ma'am, you need to see this, Marcus said, his hands shaking slightly with a mixture of exhaustion and excitement. I've been tracing the money that paid Henderson, working backwards through multiple shell companies and transfers. The trail is deliberately complicated, designed to hide the source. But there's a pattern in the transaction timing and amounts that kept bothering me. Foster, who had been sleeping on a couch in her office, was instantly alert. Show me. Pulled up a complex diagram on his screen showing the flow of money through various accounts across different countries. The £15,000 that Henderson received came through this account in the Cayman Islands. That account received funds from an account in Switzerland. The Swiss account was funded by an account in Dubai. But here's the interesting part: each transfer was for a slightly different amount, and they happened at specific intervals. 24 hours apart, each time. Someone being cautious, Foster observed, spacing out the transfers to avoid triggering automatic fraud detection systems. Exactly, Marcus agreed. But what they didn't account for is that the pattern itself becomes a signature. I cross-referenced these transaction patterns with other financial data we've collected, and I found matches. The same pattern appears in payments made to 3 other individuals over the past 18 months. Foster leaned closer to the screen, her eyes narrowing. Who are these other individuals? Marcus pulled up 3 profiles. 2 are known criminals with connections to organized crime. The 3rd is a former intelligence officer who now works as a private contractor.
All 3
have been investigated in connection with various schemes, blackmail, industrial espionage, that sort of thing. None of them have ever been successfully prosecuted. So we're looking at someone who has hired multiple people for illegal activities over an extended period, Foster said slowly. This wasn't Henderson's first job for them. This person is running an entire operation. There's more, Marcus continued, pulling up another screen. I managed to trace the Dubai account back one more step. It received a large sum of money, £200,000, from a UK-based company 6 months ago. The company is called Helix Solutions Limited. Foster immediately grabbed her phone and called Thornton at MI5. Within minutes, the team was pulling up everything they could find about Helix Solutions Ltd. What they discovered was both illuminating and frustrating. Helix Solutions Limited was a legitimate business consulting firm based in London, specializing in corporate restructuring and efficiency consulting. It had existed for 8 years, had a small but respectable client list, and on paper, everything appeared completely normal. The company was owned by a man named Marcus Reed, a 45-year-old businessman with no criminal record and an unremarkable background. But as investigators dug deeper, cracks began to appear in the facade. Several of Helix Solutions' clients had experienced unusual problems after hiring the company key employees suddenly leaving. Sensitive information being leaked to competitors, projects mysteriously failing. None of it could be directly connected to Helix Solutions, but the pattern was suggestive. This could be a cover operation, Thornton explained during an emergency briefing at 6 a.m. A legitimate business that provides real services but also serves as a front for other activities. Reed might be using his consulting access to gather intelligence, identify vulnerabilities, and arrange various schemes. But why target the Princess of Wales? James asked. He had been included in these briefings because of his role in preventing the attack and because Foster valued his instincts. What would a corporate consultant gain from harming a member of the royal family? That's the question we need to answer, Foster agreed. We're bringing Reed in for questioning this morning. Have enough circumstantial evidence to justify an interview, though probably not enough for an arrest warrant yet. Commander Reynolds looked troubled. If Reed is behind this and realizes we're onto him, he might run like Henderson did. Or worse, he might accelerate whatever other plans he has in motion. We'll have surveillance on him before we approach, Thornton assured him. He won't be going anywhere. At 8 o'clock that morning, a team of MI5 officers knocked on the door of Marcus Reed's luxury apartment in Chelsea. They were prepared for resistance, for flight, for any number of scenarios. What they weren't prepared for was finding the apartment empty. Reed was gone. According to neighbors interviewed by police, Reed had left his apartment around midnight with a single suitcase, gotten into a taxi, and disappeared into the London night. A check with taxi companies and traffic cameras showed the taxi had dropped him at Paddington Station, where he could have boarded a train to anywhere in the country or connected to trains. Heading to Europe through the Channel Tunnel? He knew, Foster said grimly when she received the news. Somehow he knew we were coming for him. The implication was deeply disturbing. Either Reed had been monitoring police activity, which suggested resources and connections beyond what they had imagined, or someone had tipped him off. The possibility of a leak within the investigation sent a chill through everyone involved. James sat in the command center, watching as the investigation pivoted to finding Reed. Alerts went out to all transportation hubs, border crossings, and police forces across Europe. Reed's photograph was distributed to thousands of law enforcement personnel. His financial accounts were frozen. His associates were identified and put under surveillance. But Reed had planned his escape well. His credit cards and phone remained unused. He didn't return to any of his known properties or contact any of his known associates. He had vanished as completely as Henderson had. Leaving investigators chasing shadows, Sarah Chen approached James as he sat staring at Reed's photograph on the screen. She had been working closely with the investigation, providing insights into Kate's schedule and security procedures. The stress of the past few days showed on her face. "Do you think they'll find him?" she asked quietly. James considered the question. Eventually, men like Reed leave trails even when they think they've covered them. The question is whether we'll find him before he tries something else. Sarah shivered. The princess is being so brave about all this. But I can see it's affecting her. She keeps checking on the children, making sure they're safe. She's trying to maintain normal routines for their sake. But how do you feel normal when someone tried to kill you? You don't, James said simply. You adapt. You become more vigilant. You learn to live with a level of threat awareness that most people never experience. He looked at Sarah. But she has something that helps people who care about her and are working to keep her safe. That matters more than most people realize. As they spoke, one of the analysts called out urgently. We've got something. CCTV footage from Paddington Station. Reed was definitely there last night, but look at this. The footage showed Reed walking through the station, but he wasn't alone. He met with another man near the ticket machines, someone who handed him what appeared to be documents. The exchange lasted less than 30 seconds, and then both men went in different directions. Reed boarded a train, but the other man left the station and got into a waiting car. Can we identify the second man? Foster demanded. The analysts worked quickly, running the footage through facial recognition systems and enhancement software. Within minutes, They had a match. The man was identified as Viktor Petrov, a Russian national living in London on a business visa. He worked as a freelance financial consultant and had connections to several wealthy Russian expatriates living in the UK. Russian connection, Thornton muttered. This is getting more complicated by the minute. The investigation immediately expanded to include Petrov. His apartment was placed under surveillance, his communications monitored, his background thoroughly investigated. What they found painted a picture of a man who moved in wealthy circles, associated with individuals who had questionable connections to the Russian government and organized crime. But the most significant discovery came when investigators accessed Petrov's email accounts. Hidden among thousands of routine business communications were encrypted messages sent over the past year. MI5's cryptography team worked around the clock to break the encryption, and what they found inside confirmed their worst fears. The emails detailed a plan that went far beyond a single poisoning attempt. Reed and Petrov had been working together for over a year, plotting various schemes to harm the British establishment. The Princess of Wales was just one target on a larger list. The emails suggested they were working for someone else, someone who remained frustratingly unnamed in the communications, referred to only as the client. "This is bigger than we thought," Foster said during a briefing that evening. "We're not dealing with one disgruntled individual or a simple assassination plot. This is an organized operation with significant resources, possibly backed by a foreign power or a wealthy individual with a serious grudge against the UK. Prince William attended this briefing, and his expression grew darker as he listened to the revelations. "How many people are in danger?" he asked bluntly. Thornton answered carefully. "Based on what we've found in these emails, there are multiple individuals considered as potential targets. Members of government, business leaders, and yes, other members of the royal family. The emails suggest they've been planning various operations, but most haven't been executed yet. Henderson's attack on the princess was apparently meant to be their first major success. It nearly was," Williams said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "If not for Officer Mitchell's vigilance, Catherine would be dead, and these people would have achieved their goal." The weight of those words hung heavy in the room. James felt the eyes of everyone turn briefly toward him, but he kept his gaze fixed on the evidence boards, uncomfortable with the attention. "What's our next move?" William asked. "We need to find Petrov," Foster said. "He's the link between Reed and whoever is ultimately behind this. We've put his apartment under 24-hour surveillance. If he returns, we'll take him into custody immediately. We're also monitoring his known associates and tracking his financial activity. And if he doesn't return," William pressed, "if he's gone into hiding like Reed and Henderson, then we keep investigating, keep following leads, and keep your family safe," Foster replied firmly. "This isn't over, Your Royal Highness, but I promise you we will find these people." The briefing concluded, and as people dispersed, James found himself walking alongside Commander Reynolds. The older man looked exhausted, the strain of the past few days evident in the lines on his face. "This job used to be simpler," Reynolds said with a weary smile. "Watch for the obvious threats. Keep the protocols tight. Respond to clear dangers. But this, sophisticated plots, international conspiracies, people willing to wait months to execute their plans, it's a different world. Do you think we're any closer to understanding why they targeted the princess specifically?" James asked. Reynolds shook his head. "That's still the missing piece. Kate doesn't fit the typical profile of someone targeted by organized crime or foreign intelligence. She's not a politician making policy decisions. She's not a business leader with sensitive information. She's a mother and a humanitarian who focuses on children's issues and mental health awareness." "Maybe that's exactly why," James suggested. "She's beloved by the public. Harming her would cause maximum emotional impact, maximum publicity. If someone wanted to make a statement or create chaos, she'd be an effective target." Reynolds considered this. Possible. Or maybe there's something we're still missing, some connection we haven't uncovered yet. The answer came the next morning from an unexpected source. One of Kate's charities, the Early Childhood Foundation, reached out to Palace Security with concerning information. A large donation that had been promised to the foundation 6 months ago had fallen through at the last minute, causing significant disruption to planned programs. The donation had been promised by a wealthy businessman named Dmitry Volkov, a Russian oligarch living in London. When investigators looked into Volkov, the connections became clear. Volkov was a known associate of Viktor Petrov. He had significant business interests in the UK, but had faced increasing scrutiny from British authorities over questions about the source of his wealth and possible connections to Russian intelligence services. Kate's foundation had initially been excited about his promised donation, but had ultimately declined it after their due diligence revealed concerns about his background. The rejection had been handled quietly and professionally. But for someone like Volkovec, accustomed to having his money open doors and by influence, the public slight must have stung. Kate had personally signed the letter declining the donation, citing the foundation's ethical guidelines about accepting funds from individuals under investigation. "There's your motive," Thornton said, reading through the correspondence. "Volkov offers money as a way to gain influence and legitimacy. Kate's foundation turns him down, essentially saying his money isn't clean enough for them. For a man with an ego the size of Volkov's, that's a massive insult. So he decided to kill her?" Sarah asked, horrified. "Over rejected donation? For men like Volkov, it's never just about the money," Foster explained. "It's about power, respect, reputation. Having a British princess publicly reject you even in a private letter suggests you're not respectable. It damages your standing in social circles. And for someone who might be involved in criminal activities, it also draws unwanted attention to exactly why your money was rejected." The investigation immediately focused on Volkov. His properties were put under surveillance, his communications monitored, his associates identified. What they discovered was a sprawling network of connections that touched organized crime, intelligence services, and legitimate business interests across multiple countries. But Volkov was smart and careful. He maintained layers of separation between himself and any illegal activities. Companies owned by other companies, employees who handled his affairs without direct instructions, lawyers who ensured everything appeared legitimate on paper. Proving he had ordered the attack on Kate would be incredibly difficult. However, investigators didn't need to prove it in court, not yet. They just needed to protect Kate and stop any future attacks. My5 made the decision to approach Volkov directly, to let him know they knew what he had done and that any further attempts would be met with the full weight of British law enforcement and intelligence services. The meeting took place in a secure government building in London. With Thornton and Foster representing the investigation, Volkov arrived with 2 expensive lawyers, wearing a custom suit and an expression of carefully controlled arrogance. "I don't understand why I've been asked here," Volkov said in accented but perfect English. "I've done nothing wrong. I'm a legitimate businessman, with complete respect for British law." "Mr. Volkov," Thornton said coldly, "we know about your connection to Viktor Petrov. We know about Marcus Reed and Tom Henderson. We know about the rejected donation to the Early Childhood Foundation. And we know about the plan to harm the Princess of Wales." Volkov's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. "I know Victor socially, yes. I've met Marcus Reed at business functions. I don't know anyone named Tom Henderson. And I'm sorry my donation didn't work out, but these things happen in philanthropy. We have encrypted emails that connect Petrov to Reed," Foster said. "We have financial records showing money flowing from your accounts through various shells to pay Henderson. We have evidence of a conspiracy, Mr. Volkov, and it points directly back to you." "Then arrest me," Volkov said calmly. "If you have such evidence, charge me with a crime. But you won't, because you know your evidence is circumstantial at best. You can't prove I ordered anything." He was right, and everyone in the room knew it. The evidence suggested his involvement, but didn't prove it beyond reasonable doubt. A good lawyer in Volkov clearly had the best money could buy, would tear apart the case in court. "You're right that we can't arrest you today," Thornton acknowledged. "But let me be absolutely clear about what happens next. You are now under constant surveillance. Every phone call, every email, every meeting, every financial transaction will be watching. If anything happens to any member of the royal family, to anyone else who has crossed you, you'll be the first person we look at. Your business dealings will be scrutinized. Your visa status will be reviewed. Your properties will be inspected. We will make your life in this country very uncomfortable." Volkov's smile was cold. "So this is harassment because you cannot prove your theories." "This is a warning," Foster said bluntly. "Whatever you thought you would accomplish by ordering an attack on the Princess of Wales, it failed. Henderson is in custody in Turkey. Reed is in hiding, but will be found. Petrov is about to be arrested. Your network is compromised. Your plan is over. Walk away now, while you still can." The meeting ended with neither side backing down, but Volkov understood the message. He was being given a chance to cease his activities and avoid prosecution. But only if he stopped immediately and permanently. As Volkov left the building, surrounded by his lawyers and security team, Foster turned to Thornton. "Do you think he'll stop?" "Men like Volkov don't stop because they're caught," Thornton replied. "They stop because continuing becomes more costly than the satisfaction of revenge. We've made the cost very high. Whether that's enough?" He shrugged. "Time will tell." Back at Kensington Palace, James received a summary of the meeting. The investigation wasn't over. Reed and Petrov were still at large, and Volkov remained free. But the immediate threat had been neutralized. Kate and her family were as safe as they could be, given the circumstances. That evening, Kate requested to speak with James again. They met in the same sitting room where they had talked days before, but this time William was present as well. "Officer Mitchell," Kate began, "I understand you've been working essentially without rest for the past week. I wanted to personally thank you again and let you know that the investigation has reached a point where you can step back and return to your regular duties if you wish." James shook his head immediately. "Your Royal Highness, with respect, I'd prefer to remain involved until we're certain the threat is completely resolved. Reed and Petrov are still out there." William spoke up. "We were hoping you'd say that. Commander Reynolds has recommended that you be permanently assigned as part of Catherine's close protection team. We'd like someone with your instincts and dedication watching over her." James felt a surge of pride and responsibility. "I would be honored, sir." Kate smiled, though there was still sadness in her eyes. "I wish we didn't need such vigilance. I wish this hadn't happened at all. But since it has, I'm grateful to have someone like you helping to keep my family safe." As James left the sitting room that night, he understood that his life had changed fundamentally. He was no longer just another protection officer following protocols. He had become part of something bigger, shield against threats that most people never even knew existed. And he was ready for whatever came next. 6 weeks after the poisoning attempt, life at Kensington Palace had settled into a new rhythm. One marked by heightened vigilance and unspoken awareness of how fragile safety could be. James had been officially assigned to Kate's close protection detail. Working alongside 3 other experienced officers in rotating shifts, every morning began with security briefings. Every movement outside the palace involved careful planning. And every meal served to the royal family went through multiple layers of testing and verification. The investigation continued in the background, a constant presence that never quite faded. Marcus Reed remained at large, though Interpol had tracked possible sightings in 3 different countries. Viktor Petrov had been arrested trying to board a private yacht in Monaco. His extradition to the UK was working its way through the legal system. Dmitry Volkov maintained his innocence while his business empire slowly crumbled under the weight of governmental scrutiny. Tom Henderson, however, had provided the most unexpected development. Turkish authorities had located him in a small coastal town, living under a false name and working at a restaurant. When arrested, Henderson had made a surprising decision. He agreed to cooperate with British authorities in exchange for a reduced sentence. The confession he provided filled in many of the gaps that had plagued investigators. James sat in the command center. Reading through Henderson's statement for the 3rd time, the details were damning and disturbing. Henderson admitted he had been recruited by Reed 18 months ago, not specifically to harm the royal family, but as part of a network of individuals willing to carry out various illegal tasks for wealthy clients. He had been paid to gather intelligence, to plant surveillance equipment, to create opportunities for blackmail or sabotage. The job at Kensington Palace had been presented as a chance to gather information. It's nothing more. According to Henderson, the poisoning order came suddenly, just days before he executed it. Reed had contacted him with urgent instructions, and Dmitry Volkov wanted to send a message to the Princess of Wales for rejecting his donation and damaging his reputation. The initial plan had been something non-lethal, a substance that would make her ill as a warning. But Volkov's anger had escalated. The final instructions Henderson received were clear. Make it permanent. Henderson claimed he had hesitated, that he wasn't a killer by nature, but the money offered was substantial, £50,000, more than he made in years of legitimate work. He told investigators he had convinced himself that someone in the palace security would catch it, that he was providing an opportunity for the princess to be warned rather than actually intending to kill her. It was a rationalization that fooled no one, least of all Henderson himself. Cowardice dressed up as conscience, DCI Foster had said when discussing the confession. He wanted the money, but didn't want to accept what he was really doing. Classic criminal psychology. But Henderson's cooperation provided something invaluable: detailed information about Reed's network. The methods they used to recruit people, the types of jobs they had carried out for various clients. It was intelligence that would help prevent future attacks and potentially dismantle an entire criminal enterprise. Kate had been briefed on Henderson's confession, and she had surprised everyone by requesting to read his statement herself. James had been present when she reviewed the document. Watching her face as she learned the full extent of how close she had come to death, how casually her life had been valued by people she had never met. When she finished reading, Kate set down the papers and was quiet for a long moment. Finally, she spoke, her voice steady but tinged with sadness. He hesitated. That's what bothers me most. He knew it was wrong, but he did it anyway because the money was too good to refuse. How many people are out there who would make the same choice? James didn't have an answer for her. The question haunted him because he knew the truth. There were always people willing to do terrible things for the right price. The only defense was vigilance, preparation, and the hope that good people would intervene when it mattered most. The public knew none of this. The official story remained that the princess had experienced a minor illness and taken a few days to rest. Life continued normally for everyone outside the palace walls. Kate returned to her public duties, attending charity events, visiting schools, carrying out the endless commitments that defined royal life. But those who worked closest to her could see the subtle changes. She was more cautious now, more aware of her surroundings. She checked on her children more frequently, sometimes slipping into their rooms late at night just to watch them sleep. She had nightmares sometimes. Sarah had confided to James that she'd heard Kate wake up gasping on more than one occasion. The psychological toll of knowing someone had tried to kill you didn't disappear, just because the immediate threat was over. One afternoon, 3 months after the incident, Kate was scheduled to give a speech at a children's hospital. James was part of the security detail accompanying her, and he watched as she moved through the wards, speaking with sick children and their families. She had a gift for connecting with people, for making them feel seen and valued. Children who had been frightened and withdrawn would light up when she spoke to them, and parents who looked exhausted from worry would find comfort in her words. In one room, they met a young girl named Emily, 7 years old, and recovering from a serious illness. Emily's mother explained that Emily loved reading and had been following news about the royal family, hoping to someday meet a real princess. Kate sat on the edge of Emily's bed and spent 20 minutes talking with her about her favorite books, promising to send her some recommendations. As they were leaving, Emily's mother pulled Kate aside and thanked her for taking the time. "You have no idea how much this means," the woman said, tears in her eyes. "Emily has been so scared, so worried about everything. But for these 20 minutes, she forgot about being sick. She just got to be a little girl talking to a princess." James saw the emotion in Kate's face as she hugged the woman. "She's a brave girl," Kate said. "Braver than she knows." In the car on the way back to the palace, Kate was quiet. Finally, she spoke more to herself than to anyone else. "That's why it matters. That's why I keep going despite everything. If I let fear control me, if I let what happened change who I am and what I do, then those people win." And children, like Emily, lose the things that bring them joy. James understood then that Kate had made a choice. She could have retreated from public life, could have hidden behind security walls and let fear dictate her actions. Instead, she had decided that her work, the connections she made with people like Emily and her mother, was more important than the risk. It was a kind of courage that James found deeply moving. The final pieces of the conspiracy fell into place over the following months. Viktor Petrov, facing overwhelming evidence and the prospect of life in prison, also chose to cooperate. His testimony confirmed Volkov's role as the client who had ordered the attack, providing details of meetings where the plan was discussed and payments made. It wasn't enough for a criminal conviction. Volk. Lawyers had ensured he maintained plausible deniability, but it was enough for the British government to take action. Dmitry Volkov was declared persona non grata in the United Kingdom. His assets in the country were frozen, his business licenses revoked, his visa cancelled. He was given 72 hours to leave Britain and informed that he would never be welcome to return. It wasn't the justice of a prison cell, but it was a form of justice nonetheless. Volkov had lost his foothold in British society, his reputation was destroyed, and his business empire was in ruins. The cost of his revenge had been far greater than any satisfaction it might have brought. Marcus Reed was finally captured in a dramatic operation in Prague. 6 months after the initial poisoning attempt, he had been living under a false identity. But investigators had tracked him through a series of financial transactions he thought were untraceable. His arrest made international headlines, though the public still didn't know the full story of what he had been involved in. He was extradited to Britain to face charges of conspiracy to commit murder, along with numerous other crimes related to his criminal network. With all the major players either arrested or expelled from the country, the investigation officially moved from active threat status to prosecution and cleanup. The palace security protocols remained heightened, but the sense of imminent danger gradually eased. Life began to feel normal again, or as normal as it could be after everything that had happened. 1 year after the poisoning attempt, on a quiet autumn evening, similar to the one when it had all begun, Kate requested a private meeting with James. They met in the blue drawing room, the same place where he had prevented her from drinking the poisoned tea. The room had been redecorated slightly. Kate had admitted she couldn't quite look at it the same way, but it remained one of the more peaceful spaces in the palace. "I wanted to mark this anniversary," Kate began, settling into a chair by the window where golden evening light streamed in. "Not with anything public or official, but privately, with the person who saved my life." James sat across from her, still slightly uncomfortable with the role he'd played being emphasized. "Your Royal Highness, I was just doing my job." "You keep saying that," Kate said with a slight smile. "But it's not just your job to notice a nearly imperceptible discoloration in tea and immediately recognize it as a threat. That was instinct, training, and exceptional awareness, all coming together at exactly the right moment. That's not just doing a job, that's being extraordinary at what you do." She paused, looking out the window at the gardens where her children were playing under the watchful eyes of their own protection officers. "This year has been difficult. There have been moments when I've felt angry that this happened. It's frightened that it could happen again. It's resentful that I can't just live a normal life without worrying about threats I can't even see coming. But I've also learned something important." Kate turned back to look at James. "I've learned that fear doesn't have to be paralyzing. It can be informative. It reminds me to be grateful for every day, every moment with my family, every opportunity to do meaningful work. Someone tried to take all of that away from me, but they failed. And in failing, they actually made me more determined to live fully and purposefully." "That's a remarkable perspective," James said sincerely. "Most people would be consumed by the trauma of what happened." "Oh, I've had my share of nightmares and anxiety," Kate admitted. "I'm not pretending it hasn't affected me. But I refuse to let it define me. I have 3 children who need to see their mother being strong and living without fear. I have work that matters to me and to the people it serves. And I have dedicated people like you ensuring I'm safe while I do that work. Together, that's stronger than any threat." She reached into a drawer in the side table and pulled out a small box. "I wanted to give you something. It's not official, nothing that will appear in the honors list or be worn on a uniform. but it means something to me, and I hope it will mean something to you." James opened the box to find a simple silver medallion on a chain. Engraved on one side was the date of the poisoning attempt. On the other side were the words for vigilance that saved a life. "I had it made personally," Kate explained. "I wanted you to have something that reminds you that what you did mattered, that you made a difference. Not just to me, but to my children, who still have their mother. To William, who still has his wife. To all the people whose lives I might touch in the years ahead because you gave me the chance to keep living." James felt emotion rising in his throat. He looked at the medallion, feeling its weight in his hand, understanding that it represented far more than a piece of silver. It represented the burden of responsibility that came with protecting others, the profound impact that a single moment of awareness could have, and the connection between a guard and the person he was sworn to protect. "Thank you, Your Royal Highness," he managed to say. "I'll treasure this." They talked for another half-hour, the conversation ranging from serious topics to lighter moments. Kate asked about James's family, his hopes for the future, his perspective on the year that had passed. It was a surprisingly normal conversation to people talking about life rather than a princess and her guard discussing security protocols as James prepared to leave. Kate stood and walked him to the door. "One more thing," she said. "I want you to know that I trust you completely. That's not something I say lightly, especially after what happened. But you've earned that trust, and it means you're more than just security personnel to me. You're someone I count on, someone I'm grateful to have in my life." James nodded, understanding the significance of her words. In the complex world of royal protocol and formal relationships, Kate was offering something rare, genuine, friendship and respect that transcended their official roles. As he left the blue drawing room and returned to his duties, James reflected on the journey of the past year. He had started as just another royal protection officer, doing his job and following protocols. One moment of vigilance had changed everything, thrusting him into the center of an international conspiracy and forever altering his relationship with the family he protected. He thought about Tom Henderson, sitting in a British prison and cooperating with authorities, probably wondering how his life had gone so wrong. He thought about Marcus Reed, awaiting trial and facing decades behind bars. He thought about Viktor Petrov, whose testimony had sealed his own fate. And he thought about Dmitry Volkov, expelled from Britain and watching his empire crumble, learning that revenge was far more costly than he had imagined. But most of all, James thought about Kate and her children, living their lives despite the threats that still existed in the shadows. The investigation had revealed that Volkov's network was just one of many potential dangers facing the royal family. There would always be people with grudges, political motivations, or simply a desire to make a statement through violence. The job of protection was never truly finished. James touched the medallion in his pocket, feeling its solid presence. Kate had said it was a reminder that what he did mattered, and she was right. But it was also a reminder of something else, that vigilance could never be relaxed, that complacency was the enemy of safety, and that a single moment of inattention could have devastating consequences. Life at Kensington Palace continued. Kate resumed her full schedule of public appearances and charity work. Her children grew and thrived, shielded from the full knowledge of how close they had come to losing their mother. William carried on with his own duties, though those close to him said he held his family a little closer now. Appreciated ordinary moments a little more. The blue drawing room was occasionally used again for private moments and informal meetings, though never quite as carelessly as before. The tea service protocols had been completely overhauled, with multiple checkpoints and verification systems. The staff who worked in the kitchens underwent additional training and background checks. The palace security team had doubled in size, with specialists in threat assessment, chemical detection, and counter-surveillance. But despite all the changes and additional precautions, one fundamental truth remained: no security system was perfect. Protection ultimately came down to people, two individuals like James who paid attention to details others might miss, who trusted their instincts even when they couldn't be certain, who understood that a single moment of vigilance could mean the difference between tragedy and safety. On quiet nights, when James stood at his post watching over the royal family, He sometimes thought about that afternoon in autumn when everything changed. He thought about the crystal glass Kate had lifted toward her lips, about his split-second decision to speak up, about the investigation that followed, and the lives that were affected. He thought about Emily, the little girl in the hospital, and countless others who had been touched by Kate's work and presence, all of them, unaware of how close they had come to losing someone who meant something to them. The medallion Kate had given him remained in his pocket always, a tangible reminder of responsibility and purpose. It wasn't about recognition or glory. It was about the quiet dedication of people who stood between danger and those who needed protection, who made sacrifices without expecting thanks, who understood that their job was to ensure that life could continue normally for others. As the months turned into years, the attempted poisoning became part of palace history, a story told in security briefings as a case study in threat detection and response. But for those who had lived through it, for Kate, for James, for everyone involved in those tense days of investigation and fear, it remained a defining moment, a reminder of vulnerability and strength, of evil intentions and protective courage. Kate continued to grow in her role, her work with children and families expanding and deepening. She spoke publicly about mental health, about early childhood development, about the importance of community and support. People who met her remarked on her warmth, her genuine care for others, her ability to make everyone feel valued. They didn't know about the nightmares that still occasionally woke her, or the way she sometimes checked the locks on her children's doors twice before sleeping, or the moments when she paused before drinking anything offered to her by someone new. But they did know that she was present, engaged, and committed to making a difference in their lives. And that, ultimately, was what mattered. Someone had tried to silence her, to end her work, to remove her from the world. They had failed. Not just because of security protocols or investigative work, but because one person had been paying attention at exactly the right moment. James Mitchell continued his work, protecting the Princess of Wales and her family with the same vigilance that had saved her life. He trained new officers, sharing the lessons learned from the poisoning attempt. He remained alert for threats that others might miss, and every day he carried the weight of knowing that lives depended on his awareness, his judgment, his willingness to trust his instincts even in the face of uncertainty. The story of the royal guard who froze after seeing Kate's drink became part of the palace's unwritten history, a testament to the dedication of those who serve in the shadows, whose finest moments often go unrecognized by the public they protect. But recognition wasn't what James sought. He found his reward in simpler things, in Kate's laughter with her children, in the knowledge that his vigilance had preserved a family, in the quiet satisfaction of knowing he had made a difference when it mattered most. And on autumn evenings, when golden light filtered through the windows of Kensington Palace and life continued peacefully for the royal family within its walls, James stood at his post and remembered. He remembered the moment everything changed, the investigation that followed, and the year of rebuilding trust and safety. He remembered because forgetting would mean becoming complacent, and complacency was a luxury no protector could afford. The threat had been neutralized, the conspirators caught or expelled, but the vigilance remained. It would always remain for as long as James wore the uniform and carried the responsibility of protecting those who could not fully protect themselves. That was the nature of the job, the burden of the role, and the honor of the service. Life continued at Kensington Palace, different than before, but beautiful in its own way. And in the blue drawing room, where sunlight still painted patterns on marble floors, where tea was still sometimes served on silver trays, the memory of what almost happened served as a constant reminder: vigilance saves lives. Instinct matters, and sometimes the smallest observation can prevent the greatest tragedy.